Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. So, Jess, how's your week been?
Well, it was really cold here this week. We had our first cold snap of the year. It actually snowed, just that kind of slushy, tiny bit of snow, like nothing stuck, but it was still pretty exciting.
It's the worst week of the year. That's when it drops like that.
Best week of the year.
That's the Californian versus the Seattle. Talking.
Exactly. Well, in the middle of that cold snap, I was down in the countryside on Friday morning. I was down in Dorset, which is like the southwest of England, and I had to leave super early to get down there for 9 a.m. It's a couple hours drive. And so when I was walking to the car, it was so cold. The ice on the car was so thick. And yeah, so it was a chilly one, but I did get a new desk chair while I was down there as well, which was very exciting. Because now I can sit cross-legged in my new desk chair.
all your funky positions that you like to get yourself into.
I do like to sit in weird positions in my desk chair. So I'm very excited that I have finally discovered a desk chair that allows me to do this. I've been on the hunt for a while.
Nice. Well, anyway, love that for you. That's
my
awesome.
Very exciting week. How was your week?
Well, we're heading into, Thanksgiving holiday seasons, and Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays because it's all about eating. I mean, I know it's about thanks and all that, but it's really about the
food.
eating.
It's really about the food.
Which is the best. So by the time of this airing, I will have had Friendsgiving. We're going to have turkey and stuffing and all sorts of delicious food. And so, yeah, I'm just a lot of events and Friendsgivings, and next Thursday is the big day. So
family shit. I get that.
I
was talking to my mom about that yesterday, actually.
Yeah, well, I got to start preparing now. This is like a marathon. You got to train for your turkey day, so you make sure you get enough. True. You can get enough in there.
Make sure you wear elastic waisted.
It's like that scene from Friends with Joey where he's got the pregnancy pants. It's like, these are my turkey pants. Oh, don't you worry. I've got some elastic pants.
Excellent. Good. I'm glad that you're planning ahead. Sadly, I will not be having Thanksgiving lunch or dinner on Thursday. It's not really a done thing here.
So,
anyway.
Yeah, yes. Great natural segue, of course, to
exactly.
Last week, we covered conversational commerce. Specifically, we talked about the power struggle for agentic commerce between a lot of the really large players. Amazon is trying to keep you in their walled gardens, while other AI companies like Perplexity and OpenAI want free access to any website across the open web. But this week, we're getting practical, giving you the tips and tools that you need.
So we've brought back my friend and colleague, Nathalie Lethbridge, who's been thinking about conversational commerce before it was even a glint in Amazon's eye, to talk through everything that an SME needs to do right now to stay relevant when AI becomes the middleman between customers and products.
All right, let's dive in.
Right. Welcome back to our friend and guest, Nathalie Lethbridge. Hi, Nathalie. How's your week been since we last spoke to you?
Yeah, it's been a busy week this week. As you know, there's lots happening all the time.
Sure,
We've had
sure
some
has.
interesting projects on the go, and some of them relevant to this, some not. So
Nathalie, do you want to remind us about your background and just kind of what you're doing here before we dive into the follow-up from our conversation last week?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of things in my background that's helpful here. One of them is a background in streaming and setting up streaming services. Another is a background in law and in some of the sort of data infrastructure issues will be familiar to me from a legal point of view. And then for the last 14 years, I've been with a company that recently relaunched with you, Jess, as a partner called Atonic, and that is really operating at the intersection of content, tech, and monetization models. So in that capacity, we've been looking very closely for the last year at all of the developments there, and particularly in the what I would call content commerce, conversational commerce kind of area, and what's evolving there. Yeah, we talk obsessively about all of this and all that's happening with AI and how it's impacting the ecosystem. And in particular, we try and frame it for everyone in a weekly newsletter called "So This Happened" to try and save everyone the time that we and mainly Jess spends in trawling through this stuff and figuring out what's relevant and what is noise in all of that.
That actually brings us nicely into this week's conversation because we have a couple of news stories that have happened since we last spoke a week ago. So we'll get into that in a minute. But just to kind of remind everyone, last week we talked about the future of the internet. What is the internet going to look like? All three of us very firmly believe that the internet will split into two tiers. So there will be an internet for humans, which is where everyone does their kind of standard browsing that we've been used to for the past 20 years. And then there will be an internet that will be designed for agents, which will be basically Rails so that agents can easily access an e-commerce site or a flight booking site or, whatever the case may be. So a lot of what we talked about last week was this concept of the walled garden, which is what Amazon wants, where they want everything to stay within the Amazon site and they don't want any external agents accessing their site to do shopping for a consumer, versus companies like Perplexity or OpenAI that want the open agentic commerce ecosystem, where it means that an agent from OpenAI or an agent from Perplexity could go onto any e-com website and find an item for you, etc. So that's really kind of what we got to last week. This week, we wanted to dive into a little bit more about what small businesses, e-commerce sites, retailers, entrepreneurs, founders, anyone who's kind of existing in this space, because obviously this is a lot of information that we're throwing at you, and even the biggest companies in the world are just wrapping their heads around this. So we kind of wanted to get a little bit more practical in this episode and really talk about how an SME could kind of operate successfully in this space and really get ahead of the game, because again, a lot of big companies are only just figuring this out.
The big takeaway for me last week was that this power struggle for who controls discovery is underway. And with Amazon doing what they're doing, and then you have ChatGPT and Perplexity just roaming as much as they want and scraping everything, the power struggle is occurring. And a lot of that is going to play out actually in the courts. And so we'll be monitoring what happens there. But again, we want to talk about this week being the practical episode. Hopefully what you can do to try and take advantage of all of these different shifting undercurrents. I think most people still imagine the website experience is scrolling through a website, but the big shift that I think that is happening is customers are delegating a lot of that discovery to AI, increasingly saying, find this for me, or I want this thing and go get it for me. And they never touch a website. So I think that's why it's great having Nathalie, you on board, because you're going to help us navigate a lot of that. Someone who's a big strategist and advisor and operator in this space, and you're watching a lot of those trends. So super excited to have you back on today to kind of talk through a little bit what you're seeing in some of the practical applications. So we'll talk
I
about
think
some
it's
frameworks
important.
that people can implement.
Last week, you had a great description for
I
conversational
was
commerce.
about to refer to
I
that.
was going to say, do you mind reiterating that? Because I thought that was
Yeah,
such a good
so I
way of
think we've had,
describing.
first of all, let's go back to the big news this week that we've
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
on Amazon. We talked a bit about Amazon, a lot about Amazon, because it is the big player here. And the news we had this week is with Black Friday, they've rolled out Rufus.
Well, we should reiterate, Rufus has been around for quite a long time, but I think they've rolled out some new features for Rufus in advance of the holiday shopping season.
And they've rolled out internationally
Yes.
Rufus so that it's now available internationally. So they've rolled it out internationally across Europe, for instance, a couple of days before Black Friday.
Yeah.
So the analogy I had was Amazon is the god Zeus on top of Mount Olympus, its own proprietary mountain, and everyone needs to crawl up to the mountain. The second analogy I will drop in for this week is Rufus, son of Amazon, or sibling or spawn of Amazon, who
Spawn.
I would describe
I prefer Spawn. Let's call it Spawn of Amazon. That's
spawn of Amazon, who I would describe as Hermes in this Greek analogy. Why? Because it's running around trying to connect everyone, delivering
It
stuff,
is.
redelivering stuff, and it's taking control of direct communication away from individuals back up to the major god. So that is, to me, what's happening here, and it's a very interesting factor. I think there's some very interesting stats that we're starting to see about the impact of Rufus. And I think we spoke about some of those last week.
I believe they're expecting an additional 10 billion in annual revenue to come from Rufus.
And an extraordinary, I think it was like 250 million people have used Rufus since it's been launched, which is quite staggering amounts of adoption. Hermes has been busy running around the mountain since it's been launched, and very successfully so. So, and is about to deliver some really big gold all the way up the top. What does that mean? Let's talk about what that means for SMEs. I think it means that SMEs have a window of opportunity to get onto the rails and have an opportunity to actually drive up. It's a short window of opportunity. And I think what I would say is if you don't get on the rails, in 18 months' time, you'll suddenly see your online web numbers just dropping radically, and you won't understand why. And it's because the system is actually now really impactful, and it might be a little late to catch up, because if you catch up, it'll have to be on the terms dictated to you by Amazon. So there is this narrow window of opportunity to get your house in order. I'm very conscious that SMEs typically are places that are very busy, and thinking deeply about marketing and what you need to do is quite a tough thing. So I suggest that really we can go through functionally what we would suggest that they want to do.
Before we get into that, I think one of the other interesting stories this week that kind of really shows how that window of opportunity is closing quickly is that Target just announced a partnership with OpenAI as well to make their inventory accessible to OpenAI's Buy with ChatGPT. We've already seen Walmart announce this sort of partnership. Obviously, they launched with Shopify and Etsy, so it's a pretty big one in the US. And so I think you can already see that the bigger companies are starting to cotton on to the fact that they need to up their game pretty quickly in order to compete against the likes of the Walmarts of the world.
Yeah, and the Target strategy is kind of twofold. They rolled out both the shopping assistant, but they also rolled out ChatGPT Enterprise to all of their employees, which is I think something over 400,000 people. So they're really showing a massive shift to how they can use AI both from a customer experience as well as an internal employee experience. So that's a pretty big shift, but clearly if you're an e-commerce business, you should be thinking of it similarly. What is my customer experience that I can provide? Some form of shopping assistant, and then internally, how am I using ChatGPT or other AI to also optimize my staff and my employee workflows?
For sure. And then another report that I just wanted to flag, because these numbers were really interesting, is there's a site called Optimizely. They came out with a recent report that said over half of consumers are already using AI to research products. A third buy based only on the AI's recommendation, which means that there is no website visit. So already we're starting to see these huge shifts in numbers, and only 27% of marketers feel prepared for this to come into effect. So I think that is one of the other reasons why we really wanted to do this much more practical episode, because those numbers are shifting super quickly. It's only been a couple of months that this sort of thing has been enabled. So it's crazy how fast behavior is changing.
I'm gonna add an additional stat from there that I also thought was very interesting. But for Gen Z, 70% said they're comfortable with AI choosing products for them. Full on delegation.
Wow.
So
That is,
very different shift. I mean, I'm
yeah.
definitely in that, probably in that third that's saying they're buying mostly based on the AI recommendation, although I still have that little hint of skepticism that I think we all should probably have. But I'm definitely trending that way. But 70% of the, younger generation saying they're choosing or letting AI choose products for them. I mean, that shows you where things are going.
I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago. I think I mentioned it on last week's episode. I managed to catch another panel about agentic commerce, and they had a psychologist there who was talking about the psychology behind this shift in consumer behavior. And Natalie, it's a shame you weren't there for this because you would have found him really interesting. But he actually, because like I know one of the things that we've expressed concern about is, are people going to be comfortable with an agent going away and purchasing something for them? And he was saying that the research that he's done and the research that he's been reading shows that actually at this point, and I think this especially speaks true for Gen Z, which is why I wanted to bring it up. They don't really care at this point. They know like all of their information is out there anyway. And there's some privacy concerns, but I think at this point, the convenience outweighs the privacy concerns.
There's a psychological analogy that's very recent, which is the smartphones and when things leapt to smartphones and wallets and paying on your phone,
Yeah.
and people's trust of that system, really. Look at how quickly now that's adopted as standard. If you go back, that's exactly what happened when the iPhone was launched and when the wallet was launched within the iPhone. So people are more trusting and able to shift more quickly than we actually think if it delivers huge amounts of convenience and if the frameworks under which it's operating is adopted at mass scale by retailers. So uh, I suspect this is going to be fairly similar in
Mhm.
impact, is that for certain things, and I think there's still a question as to when they will want to trust an agent to act on their behalf and when they won't, and which areas this actually applies to, which
That's a
areas
good
of
point.
commerce and shopping this applies to versus which it won't. But assuming that for some obvious areas like your weekly shop, your supermarket groceries, or once a month or whatever it is, that this
Mhm.
becomes the norm, then people are
Yep.
gonna and
Yeah.
you're gonna see partnerships between device manufacturers and
Well,
or some of these platforms as well, because obviously if I've got a smart fridge, this is perfect.
Hmm.
Automatically goes to my phone and it triggers, and there we go. So you can see the ecosystem kind of accelerating on itself. But
I think
that makes
Google has
me
already done that.
think of Silicon Valley again. There's
Oh
so
my
many,
God.
they were so
I
ahead of their
know
time, some of
Kyle and
their
I talk about
episodes.
Silicon Valley a lot because
Yeah.
it really was so ahead of its time.
Yeah.
But I was going to say one of the other things I think that will drive adoption, and again, this was smart of OpenAI, is they have partnerships with PayPal, again, a
Mhm.
trusted provider that a lot of people have been using for a long time, and Stripe as well. That was part of
Mhm.
their launch partnership. Again, a trusted provider, particularly in the small business space, because a lot of people use Stripe
Mhm.
anyway. So that was a really smart thing to do from the payment side because people are just very comfortable within that space
and
already.
so I think there's two things that come out of that. There are the conditions under which this will start to be adopted psychologically. One of them is this issue of trust.
Hmm.
When do consumers actually trust and what creates that trust? And the other one is safety and data protection.
Mhm.
And they're linked, but so these are the two things that any
Mhm.
provider, whether it's Amazon or anyone else, has to make sure that they have got that nailed. And that's where someone like Amazon has a competitive advantage versus a new
Definitely.
platform,
Yeah.
because people have trusted them with their wallets and their deliveries, and they've got the infrastructure to deliver the goods, so they don't think that they're just going to be ordering into a vaporized kind of environment where nothing's going to be delivered and someone's going to take their money and their details and off they
Mhm.
go.
That brings up a really interesting point, though, because let's say, and there's a little bit of a segue. I'm not sure how to apply this to SMBs, but if I'm giving OpenAI the objective of going and getting something for me. It has all this information about my preferences. I mean, a lot of people use AI, OpenAI or ChatGPT for a lot of behavioral information. Where is that boundary or what is that guardrail that stops ChatGPT from giving a lot of that information to the commerce store to say, this is what I want to buy or this is what I want to do? So
Yeah.
I do see like where can I set that line of how
Well,
much the AI
that,
can actually give information to that commerce store.
and that, to be honest, that's why there's a lot of conversation about separating the search functionality and requiring a separation of the search functionality from any
Mhm.
other functionality within an environment, so that the two don't become kind of
Mhm.
merged. Search, and maybe there'll need to be a separate transactional capability as well within that. There's, what does that
Mhm.
mean? I don't know exactly yet, but there is a lot of conversation that inquiries, that data that has been scraped should not be
Mhm.
merged with data that is your personal search data. So
Yeah.
that is definitely a subject of debating at the moment.
Let's get back to Google, because I actually think that Google's announcement from last week, which we kind of touched on briefly, is a great introduction to
Mhm.
the practical steps that we are talking about, mostly because if you are not showing up in Google's shopping graph, that is a major issue.
It's very
They
aggressive.
have really upped their AI game. They were kind of on the back foot at the start of this year, and all of a sudden they are
Yeah.
like very much at the forefront of these things. So yeah,
Yeah.
they've got Let Google Call, which allows AI to check inventory and pricing at local stores and then send you a summary. They've
Mhm.
got an agentic checkout option where a shopper can track a product by size, color, budget. The AI waits until the price inventory conditions are right. Then after the permission, they get permission from the user, completes the purchase via Google Pay. They also have this shopping graph, now contains over 50 billion product listens with 2 billion updated every hour.
Let me
So I think the issue is if you aren't
Mhm.
prepared, if your products are not prepared
Yeah, I mean, there's a
and
business right
visible.
there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to buzz us on the shopping graph and what
Yes.
that is. So think of the shopping graph as Google's real-time, constantly updated map of every product that exists
Love it.
everywhere all at once. So where products exist, how much they cost, whether, obviously the Let Google Call, if that's happening
Mhm.
kind of at scale, then you also have whether it's in stock, but it also has the attributes, the reviews, its popularity, how much people are looking at it. So it creates this really rich like map of all of the products that are out there in the world. So it allows you then to start to ask for products and actually shop based on that in real time. So where I think that's really, and Jess, you kind of started to hit on it, but what I think is really relevant is that if your product data is messy or is missing, the AI is going to skip you. It's going to show up as not a good listing versus where if you have your product listings and your descriptions and all of that and really rich context, then the AI will enable you to show up. So this agentic shopping update by Google is actually going to be really great for SME, SMBs to show up better within AI. So it's a good time to start thinking about what does your product catalog look like on your website.
I think it's an essential time. And the practical question I would have, if they only has time for one thing, what's the path to what should, as an SME, what should I fix first? And what should I spend my very rare 2 to 3 hours a week of
Mhm.
time that I could allocate to this on it? And how do I do it?
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty, right? Let's get into the practical stuff because I feel like we've been talking a lot about the theory behind it. So there are kind of three key things that we've identified that every SME, SMB should do in order
Mhm.
to appear within the Google Shopping Graph or within this agentic commerce environment. So those three things are: you want to make your product info agent friendly, and we'll get into
Mhm.
all of this in a minute. You need to have clean product data, and you need to make your checkout as frictionless as possible for humans. That's an obvious
Mhm.
one, but also for agents, and that is the newest side of things. So, and that is, I think, really really key, because if we go into this
Mhm.
two-tier internet like we've been talking about, you want to make it
Mhm.
as easy as possible for the agents. That's these rails that we've been talking about
Yeah.
on the agent level.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Jess, you brought up the concept of the two-tier internet again. I think we'll continue to talk about that, but that's a really important framework to think about, that there is going to be two experiences that are happening in parallel. And so you need to basically prepare for both. Going to that first one, the make your product data agent friendly, I think this is the biggest lever. I think it's really important to understand those two experiences. So for that agentic experience, again, this is where agents aren't going to care about beautiful design. They're only going to really care about the structured data that you provide. So descriptions, sizes, comparisons, ingredients, if that makes sense. And then now also with the Google Shopping Agent, potential availability. So actually showing how many are available in stock might skip that step where it needs to call you and check that it's available. But I think also a lot of metadata around, the image, what it is.
I'm gonna do a jargon buzzer. What is
Sorry about that,
metadata? It's the really detailed data that most of the time you wouldn't think about including because it's not important, but actually for this it is.
I would call it word flags. Basically, it's word flags that
There we go. That's a
guide
good
you
way of
through the
describing it.
content and finding it.
That's perfect. So again, to summarize, the agents see all of this data more like a spreadsheet. It's structured in the sense of you see like columns of information that are important to what the product actually is, rather than a website or an image experience where you're trying to understand. I'm going to use a word that you hate, Jess, which is poetic. Poetic is not going to actually.
You did it.
Kyle.
Poetic is not going to help here, but
it's not poetic. It's marketing copy. It's just marketing.
The marketing copy is
copy.
not helpful in an agentic experience, I think is the important bit.
That's really important, Kyle, because part of the survey that we saw also talked about the fact that only 27% optimized lead data. Marketers are prepared for this. So this is they really need to focus on exactly what you're about to tell them.
Yeah. So an example of this, I think, would be, let's say we're talking about a candle, like an artisanal candle on Etsy. Because again, we talked about how OpenAI is working with Etsy and working with Stripe. So this is actually something that I think can be really relevant. And potentially there's some small businesses on the other end of the pod thinking about how they can get their product descriptions working. So for that candle, what's really relevant is what's the weight of it? How big is it? What's the height, width, and diameter? What is it made out of? Is it handmade? What is the fragrance? All of the very specific items of that product, rather than how it makes you feel or the marketing copy of why candles are wonderful, right? And then also in stock, 10 or left, ships in 24 hours, what the specific price is. You don't want the agent having to guess. If it guesses, it potentially is going to skip the information, or it's going to prioritize some other product in a similar category that has this information. So if it's not explicit in your product description, that data doesn't exist and it could potentially skip you. So I think that's really important.
I think what I would also add to that is basically it's the same thing. AI agents don't see what humans see. So don't judge them by your own way of seeing things. When you visit a product page, they don't see the image, as you said. They don't see the beautiful photography or whatever you've written. They see price, material composition, dimensions, stock status, shipping time. They are really boring.
Yep.
But you have to go into that boring detail. And so it's not unlike metadata in the early days when I was working on streaming platforms, and the metadata was really very boring Excel spreadsheets, manual in those days, of words to describe and be checked and process. It's the most boring job on TV, but essential, because without it, you couldn't navigate through the content, and all the search functionalities that all the platforms and the pay TV providers were building around that couldn't work.
I'm gonna use one more example, which is a small clothing brand. And I'm going to pinpoint one thing that I think is really important, is that inconsistent information can also kill trust. So if we look at the pricing of this t-shirt, and it's on your site, it's, let's say, 35 pounds or $35. On Etsy, it's $30. On Amazon, it's another price. If the agent sees those kind of inconsistencies or the conflicting signals, it's not going to trust the brand and it's going to deprioritize. So it's going to drop you instantly and move on to the next brand. So Nathalie, I think your example and what you experienced in the early days is just as true now. You have to be consistent across the different places that you show up. And, the hard part, I think, for this, for everyone, is that now we show up in so many different places. We're on so many different platforms that it can become very difficult. So the very simple thing is you might actually want to have a spreadsheet that's tracking, how do I show up on each different website or platform that I'm on, and make sure that you have consistency across all of them.
You have to. I don't think you have a choice. But, I have a question for both of you on that. And I'm, again, putting myself in the shoes of an SME CEO or founder. And I'm not technical, right? And I'm really struggling to kind of get things out there and make sure my copy's right and everything. How technical am I going to need to get? Do I need to get resources? I know that I said that this was an absolute blueprint for a new business that someone could set up, but absent the business and the AI tools to automate it for me, what do I do to handle the basics for this? So you talked about an Excel tracker. So Shopify and similar apps generate schema markups automatically. What do I need to do? And is
That
it
is-
okay for me to do it most of the time, or does it really have to be 100% of the time?
That's a great question. I think this is actually where you can lean on the products and the tools themselves, because it's in Shopify's interest, it's in Etsy's interest to support you with this sort of thing, especially given Shopify and Etsy both have these partnerships with OpenAI. They're going to want your products to show up in OpenAI. So they're going to have built-in tools that I think will help you with this, especially in the early days. I will say, like, as we discussed in our first conversational commerce episode, not everyone automatically is going to appear in Buy with ChatGPT. Even if you're on Etsy or Shopify, they have a vetting process at the minute. So this is going to be part of that vetting process. Like, in order to show up within Buy with ChatGPT right now, you need to make sure that all your data is in order, et cetera, et cetera. But these tools are not going to leave you high and dry. They are going to support you in this process. So that is the first thing, is like, you can trust and rely on the tools that you use. I will say it is something that I think everyone's going to have to stay on top of. I think one thing that I wanted to flag while, Kyle, you were talking about everything, is as important as all of this product data is, and it is absolutely important for the agent side of the internet, you can't completely ignore the other side, because there is still that human element. So you are still going to need that beautiful product photography and that marketing copy that, is a little more descriptive rather than just the very cut and dry data that we've been talking about. So I think that's just one thing I wanted to flag, is like, you can't completely abandon one for the other. So I think it is unfortunately going to be, increasing the workload, but it's going to be super important.
Nathalie, one thing that you mentioned, which I think is what people can start to do today, and if you're using Shopify, this is kind of built into the platform. There are plugins that are available for this, but what you mentioned was the schema markup. That's the best kind of no code area to start to provide product information so that agents, machines, the different platforms can read it. So the way that you do that, you go into Shopify, you can fill out basic fields in your e-commerce platform. And then Shopify will generate that schema markup in the background and will give that metadata so that the agents can see it, but won't necessarily remove that or show up in the, as Jess is saying, the website experience. So it does help you kind of bifurcate those two different, or, handle the two-tier internet. And then that markup will feed into all the different agents that are going to interact, whether it's walled garden or not. So if you're on Shopify, that's a great place to basically start to put information so that it can be handled. If you're using something else, it might become a little bit more difficult. If you have like your own built website, you might need to work with a developer to provide that schema markup, or you might be able to use a plugin. But I think most people are probably using Shopify or Etsy Stack, in which case, look for this schema markup and start to fill in a lot of the basic fields around the website. And again, all of that rich context that we talk about around size, description, dimensions, inventory, all of that is really useful for that. But yeah, I think that schema markup that you mentioned is really that, like, the low-hanging fruit to start with.
That's
And
really
I will
helpful.
also say there are schema markup generators if you Google them, if you aren't on Shopify or Etsy. But this is what I mean when I say that the tools are going to help you. Like, they don't want you to fail. They want you to succeed. So they're going to provide you with this sort of thing.
Shopify, Etsy, Google Merchant Center is also an example of this. So across those three, that we're probably going to pinpoint kind of 80-20 rule here for most people. But otherwise, there's going to be plugins and availability. hopefully, I would assume there are plenty of no code tools out there to solve this for everyone.
So I wanted to ask a question and go back to a fundamental. If I'm an SME, one of the things that we've talked about is a frictionless purchase. From that journey where you purchase at the point of inspiration to your actual transactional moment, which is in the checkout. So if I am an SME and I'm thinking about that checkout experience, if I've got time to think about the checkout experience, what makes a checkout agent friendly? Without getting too technical here, I'm thinking, what actually makes it compatible, and what's the one thing you would do to make it agent friendly? And then if you haven't actually touched your checkout for years, you've had a website, it's delivered, what is the changes that you would need to make that would really optimize and make a big difference for you? And how do you make them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that holds true regardless. So you want to make your checkout process as simple as possible for both tiers of the internet.
Yeah.
But I do think, to your point, there are very specific agent things that you can do to increase the conversion. And a lot of what we'll talk about, I think, again, is consistent. But one-page checkout is really important for agents. But I also think that's going to be relevant for people. Also having mobile wallets or offering multiple payment options, because, again, different agents, depending on who their partnerships are with, are going to have different payment options. So you might want PayPal, because that's going to be really important for OpenAI. Again, another thing that I think is useful for the user experience, but is also true for agents, is minimal fields. Don't have a lot of required fields that you have to fill in, because that could potentially trip up an agent. But again, that's also going to cause drop off for consumers as well. So this is a consistent thing that's helpful for both sides.
And that brings the point of guest checkouts as well.
Yeah, that's going to be really important for agents.
It's going to be even more
Yeah.
important to have a guest checkout alternative so that you have someone able to come in without having to register all their details.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to lose them very quickly.
Because Kyle, that was one of the issues that you had when you were playing around with ChatGPT Agent over the summer, is that it kept hitting a wall when you would have to log in for something.
Yeah, I think there's two or three that are really important for the agent side that maybe we don't think about as much on the user side. So the guest checkout, or not forcing an account creation, is super important, because that's going to trip up the AI and you're going to lose that person. Another one that's in a similar vein is CAPTCHAs. I know everyone hates CAPTCHAs, but it's become like a necessary evil in some ways. But for an agent, that's an automatic pass, because they just can't answer that, right? I mean, it's inherently why CAPTCHAs were built, were to remove bots. But now we're in an internet, in a world where you need the bots to be able to do this. So that's
actually
one that
I'm going to jump in on that as well, with bot blockers in general is going to be a massive wall that they're going to hit, and so you're going to come up against that as an issue as well.
So if I'm an SME, does that mean I have to make sure that I'm updating my software so that that's incorporated into it? Because if I don't bother to update my software, then you've got any LLMs coming in might be automatically viewed as a bot and blocked. And it hasn't been updated to the current ecosystem. So presumably that's a real risk if you are allowing old software to exist on your systems.
This is going to be something that the LLMs are really going to have to figure out quickly, because they are going to get blocked by the bot blockers. But I think this is where those I know that is a tongue twister.
Say that 5 times fast.
No thanks. This is where those rails are going to be super, super important, because they're essentially like an LLM agent will have permission to use those rails versus, a normal bot, which perhaps wouldn't. But that's like a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, so if you're on Shopify, you don't have to worry about it, because those rails are going to bypass a lot of this. So you're not going to, you could still have CAPTCHAs, you could still have account creation, because the rails will be able to bypass that. The one that I think is very difficult for everyone, this is that third one, which I don't know if it's necessarily a full blocker, but it's something to think about. Fast load times. So if your site takes a long time to load, that could signal a poor checkout experience, and you could get deprioritized by the agents. So this is a hard one, I think, to monitor, but it's something to keep note of. And it may be, Natalie, to your point, just you might need to go into your checkout experience and do yourself a little audit and just see as a user, go through. And if it feels like it's really slow and you have too many steps in the process, that might give you a little bit of an idea that you're going to start getting deprioritized by LLMs, because again, agents treat slow or complex checkouts as a reason to avoid your site.
Okay, so I think we've given a number of things that you can think about, and I know we're throwing a lot of information. So let's condense it a little bit and just talk about what you can do in the next couple of weeks and or months to prepare for this agentic checkout, because as we said, everyone is cottoning onto it really quickly. So you want to get on top of it as soon as possible.
Yeah, so start with the short, actionable step in the next 90 days. Clean your product info or make your product catalog machine readable. So we've talked about structured data. Schema markup, I think, is a great way, especially if you're using a site like Shopify. You can input that product information. It will get into your schema markup, and then that will really allow some of these assistants and LLMs to benefit from it. If you have Shopify, I think you can turn on an AI assistant for your site today. So that might be something to do right away. And then also, I think kind of a little bit more of a technical one, but something to start thinking about is if you're using Google Analytics or you're using a traffic monitoring tool, start looking at your AI or bot traffic differently and try to figure out how much bot traffic versus consumer traffic you have, and just start tracking how this is going to impact your site overall.
I think also back to the product data that you were just talking about, make sure that everything is consistent everywhere. So you don't have different prices, you don't have different sizes, etc. Because again, that's when the AI is going to judge you as not being a reliable source of information. So just consistency across the board. This is where the spreadsheet that we talked about, as much of a pain in the ass as it would be to pull together, it will be super important because it can just keep, help you keep track of all of these things.
I'll give maybe a shortcut to this. Go to ChatGPT or Gemini, give it your URL and ask it to pull your product catalog and the prices and identify any inconsistencies. It might be a good way to actually get it to read it for you and tell you
smart.
like, oh, actually, I've spotted a difference. Because if you think about it, that output that the AI is going to get is exactly what it reads. So you're going to be able to see right off the bat where the inconsistencies exist.
Very smart.
And you know what? That is exactly what SME owners need to know. It's like, if they have 30 minutes a week to do this, what do they need to do? And this is exactly the sort of hack that would help them. Use the AI to help you.
I was going to say, make the AI do the hard, boring work, because that's what it's going to be looking at anyway, right? That will tell you exactly what is working and what isn't working within an LLM. So that's a great suggestion.
After those 90 days, this is where maybe it starts to get a little bit more detailed and where you're going to have to kind of dig in a little bit more, roll up your sleeves. But Nathalie, as you talked about, kind of brought up with the friction in your checkout process, you need to look at how do you simplify that checkout process and how do you reduce friction. We mentioned things that are both friction for the user experience as well as the agent experience. And there's a couple of those items that are going to be friction for the agent experience. So make sure that checkout process is very simple. Just run through it yourself and identify where there may be problems. If you haven't checked it in 5 years, it's probably a good time to do that. The internet has changed a lot. But that's going to help you make sure your products feed and are discoverable by a lot of the different tools out there and a lot of the different providers like Google and Meta and Shopify.
So another thing that I think is a really interesting option, because, we were talking about with Target getting to the point where an agent is going to be really good for these kind of predictable repeat orders that no one likes to do, right? It's the, I've run out of laundry detergent, or I need, dishwasher tablets, or whatever it is, those really boring things. If you are an SMB, consider offering subscription or repeat order checkout flows, because agents love predictable reordering, right? This is one of the reasons why Target and Walmart are leaning into this sort of thing, because it's a bit like when Amazon introduced that buy it now button. So consider what you could, as a small business owner, where you could incorporate a repeat ordering system into that, because again, agents love that sort of thing. So that is absolutely going to be something that helps you pop up on their radar.
I'm going to give a couple bonus ones if we can.
Go for it.
Something that agents tend to use heavily that is again, goes to the behavior or speaks to specific audience segments, so things that can be really useful, and also something that not a lot of product catalogs have. But using attributes like sustainability or the
That's a great
materials that you
one.
use, delivery reliability is a huge important piece of,
Yeah, very good
talking
point.
about, what people buy. And then something that's definitely flying under the radar. So something that I think you can look at is customer ratings. Are those in machine parsable formats? Because again, the agent is trying to
Smart.
figure out if this is, if it's trending, if it's popular, if it's good. And what are those signals, the buying signals that help you identify whether or not this is a good product? It's definitely going to lean heavily on those customer ratings. So that's maybe something to look a little bit in the longer term.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a way to literally level up and you've done the first 90 days and you've done all those other ones, start to look at inventory, shipping reliability, and customer ratings as a way to really elevate or distance yourself from your competitors.
One other thing that I'd like to add in is and this kind of brings it round to the conversation we really had at the beginning around walled gardens versus open commerce, is don't limit yourself to a walled garden environment like Amazon, because as we were discussing, Amazon is really not going to want you to be discoverable outside of the Amazon environment. And I think we can say eventually that'll probably be true for TikTok Shop as well. I know a lot of people are very successful on TikTok Shop, but that is also a walled garden environment. So you have to start thinking about this walled garden versus open environment, because at some point they're going to, particularly on the Amazon side, they're going to pull up that drawbridge and they're not going to let anyone else in. So just something else to think about, whether you move from just being on TikTok to being on TikTok and Etsy, or just being on Amazon to Amazon and having a Shopify site as well. I think just something that you kind of have to bear in mind for a longer term thing, but just something to think about.
Just draw a quick analogy, and that is for anyone with an SME, if you're not already thinking about these things, compare it to 2013 and mobile purchases. If you didn't have a mobile site, customers got really frustrated with you if you just wanted to stay with your online purchasing only. And they might persevere initially and buy on their laptop, but it was a real friction moments. But with AI, there really isn't a second chance. If the agents can't get your data and the checkout's too complex, it's just going to suggest the next option instantly. And so the user might never even know you existed. It's not as broad an opportunity as in 2013. So, this is important. This is important to make time for.
Absolutely. Well, this was a lot, but Nathalie, really appreciate you joining. I think some of the questions that you identified, I think, are really useful for our audience, which is you don't necessarily need a dev team or you don't need to be super technical. The big takeaway I got from this is having clean data, a simple, frictionless checkout, and then ultimately start getting yourself ready for this mindset shift that we're designing for both the human customer experience as well as the agentic machine experience.
Always a pleasure to talk to you guys. I mean, we could have endless conversations about this, and it's shifting so quickly.
Thank you so much for coming on, Nathalie. It's always a pleasure. And we will definitely have you on more.
100%. I'm sure in about a month's time, when all of this changes again.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
really, really a privilege to be here.
Bye.
Thanks, Nathalie.
See you. Bye.
Right. Let's talk some AI news of the week. We're going to rapid fire through 2 AI stories that caught our attention this week. The first one is OpenAI has just built an experimental AI model that you can actually understand, which sounds pretty boring until you realize that current AI models are complete black boxes. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, but nobody really knows how they work, which is equal parts interesting and terrifying.
No, 100%. And we've talked about kind of the vagueness of these models. We don't know how many parameters they're trained on, what it looks like. So think of it like this. For typical ChatGPT models, you can see the inputs and the outputs, but the middle part, the actual decision-making or reasoning part, is a tangled mess of billions of connections. OpenAI's new model, however, uses something called a weight sparse transformer. And Jess, I know you're going to buzz me on this one.
I don't think the jargon buzzer works on this one.
Yeah, I think don't worry about that too much. But ultimately, what each kind of node in this model does is it connects to a few others instead of everything. So it makes it a lot easier to trace how it's thinking. Think of it kind of like the neurons firing or the synapses firing in your brain. What this model does is allows you to actually see like how those synapses are firing, so you can kind of trace how it's working a little bit better.
And it's actually really interesting because beyond just the academic curiosity, like obviously from an academic perspective, it's very interesting. From a practical perspective, if we don't understand how these models work, then we can't figure out why they do things like hallucinate or why they can go off the rails. So it'll help us when it comes to the AI making these critical decisions that a lot of people are starting to trust AI with. So this model is pretty small. It's like the very first chat GPT-1 from 2018. So it's...
For any of us, we're really thinking about GPT, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the goal is to eventually build something as powerful as GPT-3 that is fully transparent. So they're starting off small and building it over time.
But it really allows us to see under the hood. And that feels important as these things get integrated into all sorts of different industries and verticals. And we need to better understand what's happening in that middle piece. You think about healthcare, finance, legal work. I mean, those are very sensitive topics where we need to be really clear about what's happening. So OpenAI's Leo Gao said they tested on something really simple, closing quotation marks, and could watch the algorithm, the model learn to solve it. So these are baby steps and, not necessarily fully practical yet, but it's a meaningful one to get to a place where we really can understand and see how these things are, how the synapses are firing underneath.
This brings us to our next story, which is that TikTok is giving users a dial to control how much AI-generated content they see in their feed. This is really interesting. It follows a trend that we're starting to see. Pinterest did something similar very recently as well.
Yeah, this is great. I think this is giving user control. Love that. So what it actually is, TikTok is rolling out in the manage topic settings. So you can slide it up or down depending on whether you want more or less AI generated content. And as we discussed in our AI Slop episode, we're seeing an explosion of AI videos on TikTok. Some of them are very realistic, even to the, let's call it trained eye, if you will. You can't really tell. But some are very obviously synthetic. Ultimately, all of this content is competing for attention.
I think this is an interesting move by TikTok. It's an interesting point of differentiation because as we've talked about extensively, Meta has just launched Vibes, which is their AI only feed. And obviously OpenAI released Sora not too long ago. So TikTok's really saying, we're not forcing you into an AI future. We're letting you choose, which I think is actually a great choice on their end.
And they're rolling out invisible watermarking for AI content, which is kind of interesting. The existing labels can be stripped when content gets re-uploaded or edited elsewhere, but these new watermarks only TikTok can read, so it's harder to remove. That way they can track AI content even when users try to pass it off as real, which has been a significant issue, especially when we talked about AI slop.
Obviously, you have some people that are going to want AI generated content, and that's cool, but you have to give people choice because there's going to be a lot of people who don't want that content. And the other thing is, as part of this rollout, they're going to be starting a $2 million AI literacy fund with groups like Girls Who Code to teach people how to spot and understand AI generated content, which is actually so important because so many people cannot tell the difference right now. So I think that's actually a great move.
Love that charity. As a quick little aside, my beach football team, we always support Girls Who Code.
Oh,
so
nice.
great organization.
Brilliant. Well, they're doing it's a very smart move on TikTok's behalf. So in this week's AI Gone Wrong, we've veered from our normal stories about chatbots having meltdown or rogue AI making terrible decisions or people making terrible decisions on behalf of AI, even though we do love those stories. And this week it's actually about something a little bit more interesting, which is Silicon Valley eating its own.
Yeah. So picture this. You're at a top AI conference in San Francisco. The room is packed with founders, investors, like VCs, people who are literally building and funding the AI companies. And the organizer asks everyone, which billion-dollar AI startup would you short? which I will buzzer myself. Shorting, for anyone who's not like a big trader, is when you bet against a stock. So you're actually betting that it's going to go down rather than buying it to go up.
And the general consensus was poor Perplexity, the AI search startup that's been raising money like it's going out of style. They've had valuations from 14 billion to potentially 50 billion, which is just insane. They are the top company that people would bet against. And this actually doesn't surprise me too much. They've been involved in a lot of lawsuits as well, but still not great.
They get beat up on a lot, so that one isn't
they
surprising.
Do.
What is surprising to me, though, is the second one, which is OpenAI.
Yes.
And OpenAI is fascinating because it is the poster child of the entire movement. Its moment with ChatGPT, it seems to be ubiquitous with, Ask Chat, just like we say Google it. They've got $13 billion in revenue. So they're basically the consumer winner everyone points to when they want to prove that AI is real.
Yeah, so that is a particularly interesting choice, as you say, for second place. And also, I think the most interesting part of this is that it's not just some like random internet poll or a survey. There were almost over 300 people in the room, and they are all literally the people who are in the business of funding and building AI companies. So these are the people with actual skin in the game, and you can bet that some of them are heavily involved in OpenAI, which is even more intriguing.
I mean, there's a lot of headwinds and there's been a lot of conversation. I've seen some kind of very defensive interviews by Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. There's definitely a lot of talk around a bubble right now. Yep. Interestingly, I will say NVIDIA, who's kind of a little bit of like leading the charge, they just released record earnings. They've increased their analyst estimates. So it's hard to really say necessarily if we are in a bubble or aren't in a bubble, but there is a lot of chatter around that. The infrastructure spending alone is insane. But yet, as we've also talked about, it doesn't represent commitments so much as like intentions. And I think that's where a lot of people are unclear about how much money is really moving between these companies. But it is trillions of dollars being committed. So it's a lot and sometimes hard to get, wrap your head around. So there's definitely a lot of reason for concern, and OpenAI is at the center of that. So they're at the center of it for the good, but now also for the bad.
Yeah, and Silicon Valley doesn't usually name names in a public setting like this. I'm sure they're all talking about things behind closed doors. So for me, that's the gone wrong part of this story. Are we in a bubble? Are we not in a bubble? Like, obviously, that's a question that can be asked for a lot of technology. But I think the fact that the people writing the checks are now starting to publicly question whether or not the math makes sense. And that is very interesting. So we have covered a lot today. And I think the big takeaway is that the window of opportunity for this is very small and it's going to be closing rapidly. So you have to start thinking about this now. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to at least be legible to an AI agent.
Love that. Legible is a great way to kind of set the bar here.
Yeah.
If you found this episode helpful, definitely share it. Drop us a review on your podcast app, wherever you get it. It genuinely helps us reach more people who need to hear about this stuff. We're all over socials, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, as @early_adopter. And remember, no E in the adopter.
And if you have questions about agentic commerce or you just want to riff on this stuff, hit us up at hello@earlyadopter.ai. We would love to hear from you.
Next week, we've got one that I'm very excited about.
You've been looking forward to this one for months.
I've had it on my list forever. We are diving into vibe coding. Heck yes, Jess. So excited for that one.
So definitely stay tuned for that. Kyle's going to be over the moon. And we will see you next week. Bye.